Well, good morning and happy Sabbath. It's a real pleasure to be here on the true Lord's Day, the Holy Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. In our last study together, we were dealing a little bit with the Sabbath as the seal of God. Basically, in this class, we've studied the seven seals, and in the last presentation last evening, as well as the presentations today, we are going to take a look at the seal of God and the mark of the beast, which is spoken of in the interlude to the seals. So basically, we're amplifying the interlude where you have the sealing, the four winds, etc. Today in our study, we are going to begin on page 373 of your syllabi. I got it right that time, didn't I? And what we're going to do, we're not going to be able to finish this lesson in one session. So what we're going to do is do the first part, and then we're going to finish this lesson and also the following lesson, which is basically three pages and a little bit. So we're going to study lessons from a forbidden tree and the idle Sabbath in both sessions this morning. Then this afternoon, we're going to deal with the last chapter that we find in the syllabus. So let's begin at the top of page 373. In this study, we will look at the subject of the seal of God and the mark of the beast from a different perspective than usual. As we examine the creation story, we notice that Adam and Eve did not actually see God create anything. Obviously, Adam did not see God create anything during the first 6 days, and Adam did not see his own creation. And when God created Eve, he put Adam to sleep. So they did not see God create absolutely anything. Therefore, they had no absolute, rational, empirical, scientific, or historical proof that God was telling them the truth when he told them that he was their creator. Belief in Jesus as the creator was a matter of faith in his word. Belief in Jesus, in other words, was not based on proof, but we'll see that it was based on evidence. However, God does not expect us to have blind faith. In matters of belief, there is no such thing as blind faith, because faith is always sustained by evidence. So you'll notice that there was no absolute proof or demonstration that God was the creator. Adam and Eve did not see God create anything. There was no demonstration that Jesus was the creator. And yet, did Adam and Eve have evidence that God was their creator? Absolutely. Eve existed in a beautiful world. God gave her a wonderful husband. Jesus talked with Adam and Eve face to face. They had fullness of happiness and joy. In other words, Adam and Eve, and particularly Eve at this point, because we are going to talk about the temptation that Eve faced, she had plenty of evidence that God was her creator. In other words, her faith was not based on blind faith, it was based on evidence. Ellen White has correctly stated the following: God never asks us to believe without giving sufficient evidence upon which to base our faith. His existence, his character, the truthfulness of his word are all established by testimony that appeals to our reason. And this testimony is what? Abundant. Yet God has never removed the possibility of doubt. Our faith must rest upon evidence, not demonstration. Those who wish to doubt will have opportunity, while those who really desire to know the truth will find plenty of evidence on which to rest their faith. In another statement that we find in Testimonies for the Church, volume 5, page 69, we find these words: If you refuse to believe until every shadow of uncertainty and every possibility of doubt is removed, you will never believe. The doubt that demands perfect knowledge will never yield to faith. Faith rests on evidence, not what? Not demonstration. Because if God demonstrated to Adam and Eve that He was the Creator, they would not need to have faith because they saw it. That's why the Apostle Paul in Romans 8 verse 24 says, why would we believe in something, have faith in something that hasn't taken place yet if we actually have already seen it? Now, let's notice the next section. We're going to deal with a question and answer sequence here in this lesson. According to the Bible, who was the active agent in the creation of the world? We could read several verses, but we want to read one passage particularly, John chapter 1 and verses 1 to 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him nothing was made that was made. So if Jesus created all things, He also created what? He also created the Sabbath. This is why He later explained in Mark 2:27 that the Son of Man is Lord of what? The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, because He created all things the first 6 days, and on the seventh day He created holy time. So there's no doubt the Bible tells us that Jesus was the Creator. And we have plenty of evidence to base our faith on. But we weren't there seeing it. So we have no absolute demonstration to prove that God was the Creator. We have evidence that we can rest our faith on. Now, what positive command did Jesus give Adam and Eve when He created? I put Adam here, but it's Adam and Eve, Eve through Adam, when He created him or them. Genesis 2:15 and 16 tells us, then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, of course first Adam, and then through Adam, the command reaches Eve. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. So, first of all, we have a positive command. Before God tells them what they can't do, God tells them what they can do. God tells them, you can eat from all of the trees of the garden. All of the trees are for your personal enjoyment. But then we have a negative command. Genesis 2 verse 17. We find these words, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So you'll notice that in the first command that God gives to Adam and Eve, He tells them, you can eat of all of the trees of the garden. They're for your personal use and consumption. But there's one tree that I forbid you to eat from. Now, we're going to see as we go along why this is important. Now the question is, what was the location of the tree from which they were forbidden to eat? Well, Genesis 2 verses 2 and 3, and I'm reading from the NIV because it's clearer, we find where the tree was located. The tree that tested Adam and Eve's faith that God was their Creator and He was the true God. The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. But God did say, you must not eat from the tree that is where? In the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die. So where was the tree that tested the faith of Adam and Eve that God was a true God and He was the Creator? It was in the middle of the garden. The tree that tested the loyalty of Adam and Eve was located in the very middle. The tree was the external way in which God could test Adam and Eve and their internal commitment to Him. So do we have an external test in the Garden of Eden, like we were studying in our last subject together? Yes. The evidence that they actually trusted God was in not eating from a tree. But their trust was really what? Their trust was inside. And they showed it by respecting God's tree. Now, who chose the tree from which Adam and Eve were not to eat? Well, Genesis 2:17 tells us that God was the one who chose the tree and pointed out the tree. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. By the way, when it says you shall surely die, in the Hebrew it says you will die by death. I don't think there's any other way of dying. What God is saying, you're going to really die. Truly die. You can take it to the bank that you're going to die. Now let's read the note. God did not give Adam and Eve the option of choosing the tree from which they could not eat. God chose the specific tree, pointed it out, and expected Adam and Eve to abstain from eating its fruit. Now, what was the appearance of the tree like? Genesis 2:15-17 tells us about this tree. Is there any evidence in the text that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was any different than any other trees in the garden? No. Let's read the note. There is no evidence that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was any different from the other trees of the garden. It was not taller or brighter. Neither did it have a different type of fruit than the other trees. What made it different was not its external appearance, but the fact that God had set it apart. God identified the tree by location, not by appearance. Notice this interesting statement from Ellen White. The book Confrontation, page 12. Adam and Eve were permitted to partake of every tree in the garden save one. There was a single prohibition. The forbidden tree was as attractive and lovely as any of the trees in the garden. It was called the tree of the knowledge because in partaking of that tree of which God had said, "Thou shalt not eat of it," they would have a knowledge of sin, an experience in disobedience. So Ellen White tells us that this tree was as attractive and lovely as any of the other trees in the garden. In other words, it wasn't taller, it didn't have a halo of light around it, it didn't have a bigger and juicier fruit, it looked just like the other trees of the garden. Now, to whom did all the trees of the garden belong? All the trees of the garden belong to God, right? Even the ones that Adam and Eve could partake of and use for their own personal consumption. Notice Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. This is where we find that all of the trees were the property of God, as well as everything else that God made, that Jesus made. The earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness. That means everything in it. The world and those who dwell therein. And now we have the reason. For He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. So to whom did all of the trees belong? The trees that they could partake of and the tree that they could not partake of. All of them belonged to God. Now you're probably wondering why we're going through this if you haven't heard this presentation before. There's an intention and a purpose why we're going through this. And you'll see it as we go along. Let's read the notes. All the trees of the garden were God's property because He had created them. However, the tree of knowledge was in a special category. It belonged to God what? Exclusively, in a special sense. Even though the other trees of the garden also belonged to God, He permitted man to use them for his own personal pleasure. However, this particular tree was not for man's use. It was off limits. Now, how much of the tree belonged to God? Could man eat just a little piece of the fruit? What would the answer be to that? Not even a little piece of the skin of the fruit of the tree. The tree in its entirety belonged to God, and man could not partake of any itsy-bitsy piece of it. Now let's go to the subtitle, Rejecting God as Creator. What did Satan tell Eve that she and her husband would become if they ate from the tree? Genesis 3, 4, and 5. Then the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So what did Satan tell Eve that she could be if she actually ate from the tree and partook of the tree that belonged only to God? Eve, you will be like God. Satan was giving her an alternative explanation to her existence. And here we have the sequence. Eve strayed from her husband's side. Eve asked herself why God forbade eating from this one tree. You can read this in Patriarchs and Prophets. When she comes to the tree, she says, "I wonder why God told us that we couldn't eat from this particular tree. It's not taller, it doesn't have a halo of light around it, the fruit looks pretty much like the fruit of the other trees. I wonder what this tree has that would lead God to forbid us from eating it." Perhaps she asked herself, is it really true that Jesus was the one who created us as He told us? After all, did we actually see Him create anything? She asked herself if there might be an alternative explanation of their existence. So Satan now takes advantage because Satan can read body language. If you read Patriarchs and Prophets, Ellen White explains that as she saw this tree, she asked herself why God would tell them not to eat from the tree. And Satan is able to read body language. And furthermore, Ellen White explains that Eve, when she came to the foot of the tree, she actually expressed her thoughts audibly. She was talking to herself, but she didn't even realize it. And so Satan now, he says, I know what she's thinking about. Why God told them not to eat from this tree. So Satan now is going to use 4 methods to deceive Eve. First, he is going to perform a counterfeit miracle. And these methods he's going to use all over again at the end of time. What was the counterfeit miracle? How many of you have ever seen a talking snake? Would it be a miracle for a snake to talk to you? You better believe it. But the snake wasn't talking, it was the devil. But he made it appear like the serpent was speaking. So he performed a counterfeit miracle. He also distorted the Word of God. So God has told you that you can't eat of any tree of the garden. And Eve has to correct him. She said, no, that's not what God said. God said that we can eat from every tree, except this one. In the third place, Satan led Eve to follow the testimony of her senses. It says in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6 that she saw that the fruit of the tree was good, and she was listening that it was going to make her wise. She touched the fruit and she didn't die. And so all of her senses are involved. She's following the testimony of her senses. And the last method of Satan was the most deceptive of all, and that was to tempt Eve to follow her unaided reason instead of following the Word of God. In other words, Satan now offers Eve an alternative explanation of why God told them not to eat from the tree. He's going to tell Eve, it's not because you're going to die if you eat from the tree. God knows that if you eat from this tree, you are going to be just like Him. What He's hinting at is that God at some point in the past ate from the tree, and that made Him God. And after that, He intimidated everybody by saying, if you eat from this tree, you're going to die. But it's really because God didn't want any rivals. Are you understanding what's happening here? So what is the devil leading Eve to do? To question God's story about her existence. Now let's read the note. Eve's only safety was to have what? Settled faith and trust in the Word of God. Period. God said it, I believe it, and that settles it for me. She was not to pay any attention to the miracle. She was not to pay attention to the word of the serpent. She was not to pay attention to her senses or to the logical, seemingly logical explanation that the serpent or Satan was offering her. The purpose of the tree was to test Adam and Eve's faith in the Lord, to see if they were willing to recognize Him as their Creator and the only true God. That was the test. In his temptation, Satan was not telling Eve that she and Adam would be little gods if they ate from the tree. He was actually insinuating that at some time in the past, God had eaten from the tree and had become God. And he assured Eve that if she ate from the tree, she would be God as well. The Hebrew word for gods in Genesis 3 verse 5, and that's the way that it's translated in the King James Version, is Elohim. It's the same identical word that appears in Genesis 1 verse 1, where it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Satan unabashedly attacked God as the Creator and his only right to be God. He was not telling Eve that she would be a little God, but rather that she would be on a level of equality with God. Satan knew that the only way he could get Adam and Eve to dishonor their Creator was by getting them to partake of the one tree that God had reserved for Himself. Are you catching the picture? So it's an attack on the Creator. It's an attack on the true God. If Satan can lead Eve to partake of the one tree that God reserved for Himself, that would be actually slapping the Creator in the face and her wanting to make herself God. Now let's go to the next section. Satan deceived Eve. What excuse did Eve give to God for eating from the tree of knowledge? Genesis 3 verse 13. "And the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" I like the way the King James says it. "The serpent beguiled me." That's an old English word. We don't use it very much, but it sounds a lot more sinister, I think. The serpent beguiled me. It means that the serpent deceived me. Now, what do we need to do in order to deceive someone? We have to offer a counterfeit. And there are three aspects to a counterfeit. First, in order for a counterfeit to be deceptive, the counterfeit must be as close as possible to the what? To the genuine. You have fool's gold. Well, you have to make it look as close as possible to real gold, right? Secondly, the counterfeit comes after the genuine in time. There's a counterfeit. The purpose of the counterfeit is to counterfeit that which is already genuine. And three, the only way to detect the counterfeit is to what? To compare it with the genuine. So in order to detect the counterfeit, do you have to know what the genuine is? Yes. Absolutely. I want you to keep those three ideas in mind because they're very important. First of all, in order for a counterfeit to be deceptive, it must appear as close as possible to the genuine. Secondly, it comes after the genuine in time. And three, in order to detect it, you must clearly know what the genuine is. Now, what was the penalty for eating from the tree? God told them explicitly. Notice Genesis chapter 2 and verse 17. "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." So the sentence for partaking of God's tree that He had reserved for Himself was death. So we've studied the original temptation in heaven. There was this external tree that tested the internal commitment of Adam and Eve to God. Now, why have we gone through this? Because there's a striking parallel with the final test. Only the final test is not going to be over a tree. The final test is going to be over a day. Now, let's notice the parallel. What positive command did God give in the fourth commandment? Exodus 20, 8 and 9. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. So let's read the note. God specified that all the trees of the garden were for man's personal use. Similarly, He has specified that the first 6 days of the week are for our own personal use as well. Now, what negative command did God give in the fourth commandment? After giving the positive command, saying all 6 days are for your own personal use, yet in the fourth commandment, God gives a negative command. Exodus 20, verse 10. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. 6 days are for your personal use. The other day, the seventh day, is off limits. It belongs to me. As God reserved one tree exclusively for Himself, the fourth commandment underlines the fact that God has reserved the seventh day of the week for Himself. The Bible tells us that the Sabbath was God's rest day before it became a rest day for man. This is why God calls the Sabbath my holy day. And that's the reason why it is called the Sabbath of the Lord your God. Because it belongs exclusively to Him. It is off limits to man. Just like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was off limits to man. Where do you think the fourth commandment is located? Where do you think the fourth commandment is located in the law of God? It's in the very center of the law of God. The tree of knowledge that tested the faith of Adam and Eve was located in the middle of the garden. Likewise, the Sabbath commandment is in the very center of God's law. And now we're going to cover something very interesting. And I didn't place the illustrations in the syllabus, but what I'll do is I'll make sure I get copies of those so that you have them. But anyway, likewise, let's go back here to the beginning of the note. The tree of knowledge that tested the faith of Adam and Eve was located in the middle of the garden. Likewise, the Sabbath commandment is in the very center of God's law. Archaeological discoveries at Ugarit, which is in what is Syria, unmistakably reveal that ancient law codes had the seal in the middle of the tablet. The seal always contained 3 elements. Number 1, the name of the lawgiver. Number 2, the official function or office of the lawgiver. And number 3, the jurisdictional territory over which the official governs. Even in ancient seals in the middle of a tablet, you had these 3 elements to make the seal authentic. Of all of the 10 commandments, only the 4th contains these 3 elements. His name is the Lord your God. His title or office is Creator. His jurisdictional territory in the 4th commandment is heaven, earth, the seas, and the fountains of waters. Now, according to God Himself, what is His covenant? Deuteronomy 4 and verse 13. So He declared to you His covenant, which He commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments, and He wrote them on 2 tables of stone. So the 10 commandments are God's what? They are God's covenant. On how many sides of the tablets did God write the 10 commandments? You know, some people are surprised about this, but they're written on both sides of the tablets. Notice Exodus 32, 15 and 16. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on what? We're going to see there's an archaeological reason for this. God gave the law in the time when there were covenants such as the 10 commandments in the surrounding nations. The tablets were written on both sides. On the one side and on the other, they were written. Now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Now the note is very significant. Clay tablets have been unearthed in the city of Ugarit. And this is the land of Canaan. That's actually Syria, just north of the land of Canaan. These tablets contain covenants between greater and lesser kings. The tablets contain writing on both sides. And the interesting thing is, the same material that's written on the front side is written again on the back side of these tablets. You say, well, why would they write the same information on the front of the clay tablets as on the back of the clay tablets? You're going to see that in a moment. So the tablets contain writing on both sides. And in the middle of one side is the authentic seal of the lawgiver. And you can find this huge seal that is impressed in the middle of the clay tablet when the clay is soft. So what happens when they impress the seal in the middle of the tablet on one side? It obliterates much of the writing. And so they would write the same thing on the back side so that you could read the entire covenant because the seal was on the front side. I have bunches of pictures of this. One time I was presenting a series of meetings at Andrews University Seminary during their week of prayer, and during the day I went to this library to do research. And I like to just go from bookcase to bookcase, looking at the different books to see what I find being interesting. And I noticed these great big green books, and the title of them is Ugarit, or Ugaritica. And so I don't know why I was curious about taking one of those down. They're huge volumes, and there were several of them. So I decided I would take one off the shelf, and I went to the table there, and I started leafing through them. And then suddenly I saw these tablets. Many, many different tablets that were unearthed in Ugarit. And these tablets were written on both sides, and in the center of the tablet always was the dynastic seal of the king that is making the covenant. And on one side, the seal is impressed on the clay. It obliterates the writing on the front side, so they write the same information on the back side. Very significant. And the seal was in the center of the tablet. I'm going to give you, I'll take some photocopies that you'll be able to take with you. Let's continue here. The seal of authenticity in the middle of the tablet contains the name, the title, and jurisdictional territory of the law-giving king. One is reminded of the Ten Commandments. They are a covenant between God and His people. And the tablets were written on both sides. One would therefore expect God's seal to be in the very center of the Ten Commandments. And it is. The fourth commandment is the only one that identifies the name of the lawgiver, his function or office, and his jurisdictional territory. So we ask the question, according to God Himself, what is His covenant? The Ten Commandments. Where would we expect to find God's seal in the Ten Commandments? In the middle of the tablet. Where was the tree in the Garden of Eden that tested Adam and Eve? In the middle of the garden, as we noticed. Now, who chose the seventh-day Sabbath as the specific day of rest? Exodus 16:29. See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Who did? The Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore He gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. God chose the tree from which Adam and Eve were not to eat. In like manner, God established the seventh day at creation as His day of rest. God has not given man the option of choosing on which day he will abstain from work. The fourth commandment does not say, remember to keep 1 day in 7, or remember to keep every seventh day, or remember to rest, or take time to rest. God said, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. God did not give man the option. God chose the day. Who chose the tree? God chose the tree. Now here we come to a very important point. How many days belong to God? All days belong to God because He made them. But the Sabbath belongs to God how? In a special way. It is God's exclusive property. It is holy, and we are not to use it for ourselves. And you'll always meet people that will say, oh, I believe that all days are God's. Now, how are you going to answer that? All days are God's.
It's true.
Say, yeah, I agree with you, but not all days are holy. That's the answer that we have to give. All days are God's, but not all days are holy. All trees were God's, but one tree was exclusively His, that He reserved for Himself. Let's continue here. The same principle applies to the Sabbath as applies to the tithe. Some people affirm, I believe that all days are God's days. And they are right. But this does not mean that all days are holy. How much of our money belongs to God? All our money belongs to God. Because God says, mine is the silver and mine is the gold. Haggai 2 verse 8. However, this does not mean that all our money is what? Holy. God did not say that all days are holy. There is only one day that God identified as holy, the Sabbath. And then we have the stories that I mentioned yesterday, the story of Nadab and Abihu and the story of Belshazzar. They illustrate two serious sins against God. The story of Nadab and Abihu, God said, I want you, when you mingle incense with fire, I want you to take the fire from the altar of sacrifice, because that's the fire that I rain from heaven. That's holy fire. But Nadab and Abihu, under the influence of wine, is Babylon going to be under the influence of wine at the end of time? Absolutely, wine is involved, but it's spiritual wine. It's false doctrine. Under the influence of wine, they took common ordinary fire, and they offered it to God as if it were holy. And what did God say? God said, no problem, fire is fire. No! Let me ask you, do you think the chemical properties of the fire that they took was the same as the fire that from the altar? Yes. Sure. Do you think that if they put their fingers in both fires, their finger would be burned? Of course. Did the fire look the same? Sure. What distinguished the fire that they were supposed to take? The fact that God had said it was holy. Has nothing to do with appearance. What happened with them as a result of taking something that was common and presenting it as if it was holy? The Bible says fire came out from the most holy place and consumed them in the sanctuary. Then we have the story of Belshazzar, also under the influence of wine. And he's, by the way, the last king of Babylon. And in Revelation we have Babylon the Great. And he was drinking wine, and so he says, let's bring the holy vessels and make a common use of them and put wine in them. So he's doing the opposite. He's taking something that's holy and he's treating it as if it was common. What happened with Belshazzar? That very night he was slain and the kingdom was taken from him. If God allows people to take a common day like Sunday, which is a working day, and to present it to Him as if it were holy, that would be the same as the sin of Nadab and Abihu. And if God allows people to take a holy day like the Sabbath and treat it like it's common, that would be like the sin of Belshazzar. God is going to have to apologize to those people from the Old Testament. But you might say, well, but God, back then God was all justice and now He's all mercy. God's character doesn't change. When God says the seventh day is a Sabbath, He means the seventh day. He doesn't mean the first day. First day is a secular day. 6 days are for you. The seventh day, God says, is mine. Just like in the garden, God said, all of the trees are for your personal consumption, but this one tree is off limits to you. Notice this statement that we find in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4A, pages 14 and 15. When God says, keep the seventh day, He does not mean the 6th, nor the 1st, but the very day He has specified. Is that true of the tree in the garden also? Yes. If men substitute a common day for the sacred and say that will do just as well, they insult the maker of the heavens and the earth. Did Eve insult the maker of heaven and earth by eating from God's tree? You're catching the parallels here? So once again, if men substitute a common day for the sacred and say that will do just as well, they insult the maker of the heavens and the earth, who made the Sabbath to commemorate His resting upon the seventh day after creating the world in 6 days. It is dangerous business in the service of God to deviate from His institutions. Those who have to do with God, who is infinite, who explicitly directs in regard to His own worship, should follow the exact course He has prescribed, and not feel at liberty to deviate in the smallest respect, because they think it will answer just as well. God will teach all His creatures that He means just what He says. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? Now let's talk about the Sabbath and astronomy. Thought question. Is there any astronomical reason for a 7-day week? No astronomical reason. Let's read the note. There is an astronomical reason or explanation for the year. It takes our planet 365, actually 365 and a quarter days to make one complete turn around the sun. There is an astronomical explanation for the month. It is the interval between one new moon and the other. There is an astronomical explanation for the day. It is the amount of time that it takes our planet to make one complete turn around its axis. However, there is no astronomical explanation for a 7-day week. The only reason we have a 7-day week is that God made it so at creation. Notice Signs of the Times, March 20, 1879. The first week, in which God performed the work of creation in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, was just like every other week. The great God, in His days of creation and day of rest, measured off the first cycle as a sample for successive weeks till the close of time. The weekly cycle of 7 literal days, 6 for labor, and the 7th for rest, which has been preserved and brought down through Bible history, originated in the great facts of the first 7 days. Let me ask you, do all the days of the week look alike? Yes or no? Does the sun rise and set on the Sabbath as well as the other days? Yeah. Do each of them have 24 hours? Do we go to bed and get up on every day? Sure. So the Sabbath, by its external appearance, looks like every other day. Just like that tree looked like every other tree. What made the tree distinct? Not its appearance, but the fact that God had set it apart. What makes the Sabbath unique? It's like every other day, except for the fact that God set it apart as His day of rest. Now, what great fact does the Bible Sabbath memorialize? Exodus 20:11. Let me ask you, if Adam and Eve respected the tree, would that show that they believed that God was the only true God and the Creator? If they respected the tree, the external tree, they would be showing that they had faith in God. Their external act of obedience showed their faith. Is that true also with regard to the Sabbath? Notice Exodus 20, verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and what? And sanctified it, or made it holy. The Sabbath is a memorial of the Creator. And by observing it, we are recognizing the fact that He alone is God and that we are His what? That we are His creatures. If we remember, the tree of knowledge in the garden also tested man's willingness to accept God's sovereignty as the only true Creator God. When we keep the Sabbath, whom are we recognizing as the only true God? Well, notice Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 20. Hallow my Sabbaths, and they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know what? That I am the Lord your God. As abstaining from the tree of knowledge was an external sign of loyalty, so Abstaining from our own secular affairs on Sabbath is an external sign of loyalty to the true God. How many hours of the Sabbath belong to God? Can we use just a little itsy-bitsy piece of skin? Leviticus 23, verse 32. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls. And this is talking about the Day of Atonement, but the principle is when the Sabbath begins and ends. It says, on the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. Now, when is the evening? Mark 1:32 tells us when the evening is. At evening, when the sun had set, they brought him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. How much of the time of the Sabbath belongs to God? 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. No. From sundown to sundown, the Sabbath belongs to God. Just like the entire tree and all the fruit belonged exclusively to God. Some people might say, well, all that fruit went to waste, huh? No, because in the Garden of Eden, probably the fruit on that tree didn't actually fall. But anyway, we don't know that for sure. Let's read the note. We must keep the Sabbath from evening to evening. That is, from sundown to sundown. The evening and morning marked each day of creation. The entire 24-hour period belongs to God. Not one little itsy-bitsy second can be used for our own secular affairs. The commandment forbids going out to eat in a restaurant, playing ball. I've enumerated some things here, sleeping all afternoon, watching certain kinds of television, not all, you can watch 3ABN, and of course, some TV. Shopping at the mall, etc. Those are all secular activities. If we love Jesus, it will be our great pleasure to leave aside our common endeavors to concentrate only on Him on the Sabbath. It will be a delight, and we will not desire to do anything else other than enhance our relationship with Him, because strong relationships are based on spending time. We will not do as Israel was doing in the days of Hosea, when they were longing for the Sabbath to be over so that they could carry on their own secular business. You can read that in Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. Ellen White well remarks, and I'm going to read three or four statements now from her writings. A partial observance of the Sabbath is not accepted by the Lord and has a worse effect upon the minds of sinners than if you made no profession of being a Sabbath keeper. They perceive that your life contradicts your belief and lose faith in Christianity. The Lord means what He says. That's 4 Testimonies 248. On page 249, she wrote, it is as ruthless a violation of the law to occasionally use the Sabbath for secular business as to entirely reject it, for it is making the Lord's commandment a matter of convenience. On page 250, we find this statement. Many excuse themselves for violating the Sabbath by referring to your example. She's writing to a certain individual. They argue that if so good a man who believes the seventh day is the Sabbath can engage in worldly employments on that day, when circumstances seem to require it, we were talking about this yesterday, right? Surely they can do the same without condemnation. Many souls will face you in the judgment. She's writing to a specific individual, making your influence an excuse for their disobedience of God's law. Although this will be no apology for their sin, yet it will tell fearfully against you. Then she also wrote about guarding the edges of the Sabbath, 6 Testimonies 3:56. We should jealously guard the edges of the Sabbath. Remember that every moment is consecrated. How much? Every moment is consecrated holy time. Whenever it is possible, employers should give their workers the hours from Friday noon until the beginning of the Sabbath. We do that at Secrets Unsealed. We give everybody off at noon. We don't work on Friday afternoon because it's preparation day. Give them time for preparation. that they may welcome the Lord's day with quietness of mind. By such a course, you will suffer no loss, even in temporal things. Powerful statements, aren't they? Does Satan hate the Sabbath? Why would he hate the Sabbath? Well, let's go to Isaiah 14, verse 14. This is when he is in heaven. What great aspirations did Lucifer have in heaven that led to his downfall? He said what? I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. What did Satan want to be? He wanted to be God. So could he keep the Sabbath and still claim to be God? No, because the Sabbath points out the true God. So if Satan kept the Sabbath, then Satan would be saying that the Lord is the true God. So Satan had to adopt what? His own day, so that he could claim to be God. Notice, let's read the note. There can be no doubt that Satan hates the Sabbath, because it reveals what? The absolute distinction between the Creator and the creature. At the beginning, Lucifer, later called Satan, wanted to be God, which is a preposterous idea for a mere creature. Satan's hatred for the Sabbath stems from the fact that it identifies the true Creator, whose position he wanted to usurp. We can discern Satan's hatred for the Sabbath by the way he led Israel to persistently violate it in the Old Testament, by the way in which the religious leaders of Christ's day distorted its meaning, and by the way Christians disdain and attack it today. All you have to do to see how much Satan hates the Sabbath is look at the history of the Sabbath and how Satan has led people either to distort the Sabbath or to idolize the Sabbath. Now let's talk about the genuine and the counterfeit. Which genuine day of worship did God create at the beginning? Well, let's read a text that we already know. We've read many, many times. We can probably repeat from memory. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. Now, do you suppose that if God has the Sabbath as his sign, as the true God and as the Creator, if Satan wants to occupy the position of God, can he keep the same day? No, because the Sabbath points to the true God. So must the devil adopt another day, which is his creation, to exalt him as God? Absolutely. Let's read the note. Satan has a counterfeit for each one of God's truths. It is important to remember that the counterfeit in most cases, not always, because Satan sometimes preempts. When he knows what's going to happen, he preempts it. For example, does Satan know that there's going to be a great revival right around the corner among God's people? Yeah, Ellen White says that before that happens, Satan is going to introduce a counterfeit. But the counterfeit always has reference to the genuine. But generally, the counterfeit comes after the genuine, to counterfeit the genuine. So now notice, it is important to remember that the counterfeit in most cases comes after the genuine in time. And the counterfeit deceives because it is so what? So similar to the genuine. Is Sunday a day? Does it have 24 hours? Do you get up and go to sleep on that day? Does the sun rise and set on that day? Yeah. Do people purport that keeping that day honors God? Yeah. Perfect counterfeit. God's genuine day of worship at the very beginning was the seventh-day Sabbath. Would we then expect a counterfeit day of worship later on in history? Would it be a day that purportedly honors God? Yes, to both questions. However, in order to be deceptive, it would have to be a day that supposedly honors God. Which day of worship has the Christian world embraced that seemingly honors God, but really does not? The answer is unmistakable. Sunday. Thought question. This is our last point in this first session. Is the Sabbath really better than any other day? What is the true issue involved in keeping the exact day that God has specified? Let's read the note. The Sabbath is not better than any other day per se. The central issue in the Sabbath Sunday controversy is not whether one day is better than the other. The central issue is whose authority do we obey? By keeping the Sabbath, we are recognizing the authority of the one who established it. On the other hand, by keeping Sunday, we are recognizing, many people perhaps inadvertently, we are recognizing the authority of the power that made it a day of worship. And what power is that made Sunday the day of worship? The Roman Catholic papacy, the little horn or the beast. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, speaking about this little horn that spoke blasphemies against the Most High and that persecuted the saints of the Most High and ruled for times, and the dividing of time. We're also told that this little horn thought that it could change God's law. Which day does the papacy say that we're supposed to keep? We're supposed to keep Sunday. But when we keep Sunday, we are honoring the power that claims to have changed the day. Let me ask you, what would the papacy have to be in order to change God's law? It would have to be God. Because only God can change His law. That's why 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says that the man of sin, which is another way of describing the little horn or the beast or the harlot, the man of sin sits in the temple of God claiming to be what? Claiming to be God. Only God could change His law, and of course God isn't going to change His law. So when the papacy says, we change the Sabbath to Sunday, it is claiming to exercise the power and prerogative of God. It is usurping the position of God. And who is behind it all? The one who said, I will be like the Most High. So folks, the issue of Sabbath and Sunday is an issue of authority. If Adam and Eve respected God's tree, they would be respecting His authority. Human beings at the end of time who respect God's day are respecting God's authority. We cannot substitute anything in place of what God has said that we should do. We need to strictly obey what He has told us to do. And we all will always come out well if we do what God instructs us and commands us to do.